Judge sides with white cops in court until the black woman reveals she's a U.S. attorney. From the moment Danielle Carter entered the courthouse, she felt the weight of unspoken judgment. The murmurs spread like wildfire, fueled by prejudice. At the plaintiff's table, two uniformed officers sat with smug confidence. Judge Richard Calloway, known for siding with law enforcement, cleared his throat, preparing to speak. What no one expected was the truth Danielle held within her. She wasn't just another black woman fighting a losing battle. She was a United States attorney, and today she was ready to shake the room. An unexpected traffic stop. That morning, Danielle woke early in Newark, New Jersey, her townhouse buzzing with the sounds of the city. She reviewed legal briefs over coffee, preparing for a demanding day at the U.S. Attorney's office in Manhattan. Instead of taking the train, she decided to drive, needing flexibility for an unexpected legal matter in Jersey City. As she navigated morning traffic, soft jazz played in the background, grounding her. Then the piercing sound of police sirens shattered the moment. She glanced in her mirror. A police cruiser tailed her, lights flashing. Though she had broken no laws, her stomach clenched. She pulled over, hands steady on the wheel, reminding herself to comply. Two officers approached. Officer Matthew Briggs, tall and wiry, and Officer Jason Fuller, stocky with an air of authority. Briggs knocked on her window. "License and registration." Danielle handed them over. "May I ask why I was stopped?" Fuller smirked. "Your plates were flagged as suspicious." She narrowed her eyes. "Suspicious how?" Briggs studied her license. "You live in Newark but drive through here. What's your business?" Her jaw tightened. That wasn't protocol. That was profiling. "I work in Manhattan. I was making a stop on my way to work," she replied evenly. Fuller chuckled. "That's so? You sure you're not lost?" Her grip on the wheel tightened. She had heard this before, seen it in depositions, watched it unfold in cases she had prosecuted. After an unnecessary delay, they let her go, but not before Fuller leaned in and said, "Be careful where you drive. Wouldn't want trouble." Danielle drove away, her hands trembling, filing a case and facing the court. By the end of the week, Danielle filed a formal civil rights complaint. It was dismissed. That's when she decided to take legal action. Now standing in court, she faced the same officers who had profiled her. The judge barely glanced at her. "This appears to be a routine traffic stop," Calloway said. "The officers acted within their discretion." Danielle stood. "Your Honor," she said, voice unwavering. "May I address the court?" "Briefly." Danielle stepped forward. The room fell silent. "My name is Danielle Carter. I am a United States attorney with the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice." A ripple of shock spread across the room. The officers' smirks vanished. The judge stiffened. "These officers illegally profiled me, detained me without cause, and dismissed my concerns with disrespect," she continued. "Their actions were unconstitutional. As an officer of this court, I have both the duty and authority to ensure justice is served." Murmurs erupted. Judge Calloway's expression shifted. Danielle folded her arms. "I suggest we proceed with this case, unless the court intends to ignore the testimony of a federal prosecutor." Silence. The walls of unchecked power had cracked. The battle for justice had begun. Officer James Calloway had a mustache that drooped above his thin lips, giving him a permanently sour expression. His partner, Officer Eric DeWitt, was stockier, his face flushed red, either from the cold wind or irritation. Both men approached Danielle Carter's driver's side window with a swagger that exuded authority. Danielle took a steady breath and lowered her window. "Good morning, officers. How can I help you?" Calloway didn't return the courtesy. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," he demanded, his tone clipped and impersonal. Danielle complied without hesitation, passing over the requested documents. "May I ask why I was stopped?" Calloway barely looked at her as he waved a dismissive hand. DeWitt smirked, leaning closer to peer inside her car, his eyes roaming over the interior as if searching for something out of place. "You were speeding," Calloway finally answered. "Doing 45 and a 30. Danielle knew that was false. She had been driving carefully, mindful of pedestrians and the morning school traffic. But she also understood how these encounters often unfolded. Any sign of protest could escalate the situation. She forced herself to stay calm. "Officer, I believe I was under the limit. Is there any chance you may have clocked the wrong car?" DeWitt rolled his eyes. "I don't make mistakes with my radar gun. Listen, lady, are you going to give us trouble?" Danielle's grip on the steering wheel tightened. She was no stranger to microaggressions, but something about their demeanor suggested more than just a routine stop. She knew their type, the kind who saw authority as a weapon rather than a duty. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she replied evenly. "I just want clarity." Calloway and DeWitt exchanged hushed words, but Danielle caught snippets. Attitude and these people. She'd heard enough coded language in her career to know exactly what was happening. Calloway stepped back toward the car and squared his shoulders. "Step out of the vehicle." Danielle's stomach clenched. "For what reason?" "We need to conduct a quick search," Calloway said. Danielle's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "A search requires probable cause or my consent. Which one do you have?" DeWitt scoffed, stepping forward. "Are you resisting, ma'am?" Danielle fought to keep her voice measured. "I'm asserting my rights. That's all." But the tension had already escalated. Calloway grabbed the door handle. "Get out of the car. Now." Danielle exhaled sharply. She knew her rights, but she also knew the reality of pushing back. People on the sidewalk had begun to slow, observing the scene with wary expressions. She noticed a bystander raise a phone, recording. Good, she thought. Let them see this. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, keeping her hands visible. Calloway gestured toward the hood. "Place your hands right here." "For what reason?" she asked again. "You fit the description of a suspect." A flicker of rage ignited in Danielle's chest. There it was, the fabricated excuse, the manufactured justification. She turned to look Calloway square in the eyes. "Do you know who I am?" DeWitt snorted. "Someone who's about to be detained." Danielle let a slow smirk cross her lips. They had no idea. "I'm Danielle Carter, United States Attorney for the Civil Rights Division." The officers froze. The onlookers gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh, they messed up." Calloway's posture stiffened. "You're a what?" Danielle took a step closer. "I prosecute civil rights violations. That includes illegal traffic stops, unlawful searches, and racial profiling." The color drained from DeWitt's face. Calloway stammered, Well, we were just doing our job." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Then I'm sure you won't mind if I file a federal complaint. After all, you followed protocol, right?" Silence. Calloway's jaw clenched. He glanced at DeWitt, searching for an escape. Danielle turned her head slightly. "Officer, am I free to go?" Neither man spoke. After an agonizing pause, Calloway exhaled sharply and muttered, "Yes." Danielle didn't wait for another word. She returned to her car, shutting the door with measured calm. As she pulled away, she caught one last glance in her mirror. Calloway and DeWitt stood frozen on the sidewalk, two men who had spent years abusing their authority, now terrified of someone with more power than them. Danielle smiled. Today, justice had a new face, a reckoning on the horizon. As Danielle Carter stood beside her car, Officer DeWitt patted her down roughly while Calloway rummaged through the back seat. Every moment of the search heightened her sense of violation. Each time she tried to speak, DeWitt snapped at her to stay quiet. She complied, outwardly, but inside her anger burned. Danielle wasn't just any passerby. She was a federal prosecutor in the making, a woman who had spent years mastering the law to defend justice, not be subjected to injustice. She knew the boundaries these officers were crossing. Finally, Calloway slammed the car door shut. "There's nothing here." "Let's just write her up for speeding," DeWitt muttered. "Maybe add resisting an officer." Danielle's head snapped up. "Resisting? I complied fully." DeWitt smirked. "We'll see what the report says." They had no idea who they were dealing with. Danielle had the power to make one phone call that could trigger a federal inquiry, an investigation that could unravel years of misconduct, but she wasn't going to reveal her position just yet. She wanted to see how far they would take their abuse of power. As she watched them drive away, leaving her with a bogus speeding summons and an underlying threat of escalated charges, she felt herself trembling, not with fear, with rage. Her calm demeanor during the stop had been her shield, honed through years of enduring microaggressions, dismissive glances, and thinly veiled hostility. It was a defense mechanism, one she had built from pride, dignity, and relentless resolve. Long before she had the power to prosecute, Danielle had been a young girl growing up in Newark, New Jersey. Her parents, Jonathan and Evelyn Carter, had instilled a deep sense of justice in her. Her father was a history professor who specialized in African American studies at Rutgers University. Her mother, a social worker, fought for low-income families who were often ignored by the system. Dinner table conversations revolved around civil rights icons, systemic oppression, and the relentless fight for justice. She learned from stories of her ancestors who marched on Washington and staged sit-ins, people who refused to bow to injustice. But she also learned that change didn't come from anger alone. It required strategy. When Danielle was 9 years old, she had witnessed an incident that would shape her entire life. Her uncle, a kind and soft-spoken man, had been accosted by police for no reason. She had stood frozen on the sidewalk, her small hands balled into fists, watching as a white officer shoved him against a wall, accusing him of looking suspicious. Danielle had been powerless. The image never left her mind. It solidified her purpose, to fight back against abuse of power at the highest levels. By high school, she had developed a razor-sharp intellect and an unshakable will. She excelled in mock trials, debate team, and legal studies, earning a full scholarship to Howard University before securing a place at Columbia Law School. She had worked tirelessly to ensure no one else felt as helpless as she once had. And now, standing on that cold sidewalk, watching her abusers drive away with smug grins, she knew this was far from over. Because this time, she wasn't a scared child watching from the sidelines. This time, she was ready for war. A legal reckoning debate club had quickly turned Danielle Carter into a force to be reckoned with, known for her sharp intellect and composure under pressure. She also volunteered at a local legal aid center, where she saw firsthand how the law could be both a weapon and a shield. It was there that she met Sharon Fields, a seasoned civil rights attorney who became her mentor. "Empathy, Danielle," Sharon would say. "Without it, you become just another cog in a broken system." That lesson stuck with her. At Howard University, Danielle double majored in political science and African American studies. In heated classroom debates about systemic racism, her personal experiences and academic research fueled her conviction. The justice system needed reform from within. She graduated with high honors, earned a spot at Georgetown Law, and later secured a coveted clerkship at the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. Her reputation for civil rights advocacy grew, and soon she found herself working at the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. For years, Danielle refined her understanding of the law, not just as a set of rules, but as a battleground where power and justice clashed. She carried with her the stories of her family, her mentors, and countless victims of injustice. She made a personal vow. If she ever encountered blatant racial discrimination, she wouldn't just file a complaint. She would fight back. The confrontation with Officers Calloway and DeWitt had stayed with her all evening. Their sneering faces, the humiliation of being searched in public for no reason, the threats of false charges. But this time, she wasn't a helpless child watching from the sidelines. She had the means, the knowledge, and the authority to fight back. Once home, Danielle sat at her kitchen table, the faint aroma of coffee still lingering in the air. The bogus speeding summons sat next to her laptop, a symbol of their abuse of power. Her first instinct was to rip it up in frustration, but she knew better. This wasn't just a ticket, it was evidence. She opened her laptop and typed a detailed memo. Time, location, and conduct of the officers. Their dismissive tone, racial undertones, and bullying tactics. Their explicit threat to escalate charges without cause. Every detail mattered. Precision was key in a legal battle. Then she made a call to an old friend, Marcus Reed. A fellow Department of Justice attorney, Marcus had been her classmate at Georgetown and was now working in federal oversight of police misconduct cases. She didn't give him all the details over the phone, just enough to signal that this was serious. "I need to talk, Marcus. It's about something that happened today. Something big." He didn't hesitate. "Meet me at my office first thing tomorrow. We'll go over everything." Danielle hung up, staring at her laptop screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was only the beginning. She had the law on her side, and this time, she was ready to use it. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. That's exactly why we have to act quickly. I can reach out to an internal affairs contact, but given the nature of this, we may need to push for a federal investigation. Maya exhaled, steadying herself. I expected this kind of profiling, but I didn't think they'd be this blatant about it. If they can do this to me, imagine what they're doing to people who don't have legal knowledge or resources. Marcus nodded. And that's why we have to be strategic. You need to document everything, formally submit a complaint, and let me pull some strings to see if there's a larger pattern. If these officers have done this before, we'll find out. Maya sat back, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. The weight of the moment settled in. She had the power, the expertise, and now the opportunity to hold these officers accountable. I'm not letting this go, she said, her voice steady. Marcus smiled slightly. I didn't think you would. They finished their coffee, and as Maya walked back to the DOJ building, a renewed sense of purpose burned inside her. This wasn't just about her. This was about justice. That afternoon, Maya sat in her office reviewing case files, but her mind kept returning to the morning's conversation. She took out the summons from her bag, smoothing out the paper, her eyes scanning the flimsy justification for the ticket. It was a reminder of something bigger, a system that, too often, bent the rules against people who looked like her. She wasn't naive. Filing a complaint against police officers, especially ones protected by a powerful union, wasn't easy. They could retaliate, falsify reports, or try to discredit her. But she had spent her life preparing for moments like this, and she refused to be intimidated. Determined, she began drafting her formal complaint. She detailed everything: the stop, the search, the inappropriate comments, the veiled threats. Every word mattered. Every detail had to be precise. She included the officers' names, badge numbers, and timestamps. By the time she finished, the document was airtight. She sent it to Marcus for review before submitting it to Internal Affairs. If these officers had a history of misconduct, it was about to come to light. The next morning, Maya received a call from Marcus. I sent your complaint to my contact at Internal Affairs, he said. You were right to be concerned. Miller and Rohr have had multiple complaints against them, racial profiling, excessive force, but nothing ever sticks. Complaints get lost, witnesses refuse to testify, officers close ranks. But now with you, they might have finally messed with the wrong person. Maya's grip tightened on her phone. Then let's make sure this doesn't get buried. Marcus sighed. I also heard something else. I don't want to alarm you, but I have reason to believe they know you filed the complaint. Be careful. Maya's stomach clenched, but she pushed down her fear. I appreciate the warning, Marcus, but I'm not backing down. She hung up, her mind already racing ahead. She had expected pushback. What she hadn't expected was how personal this would become. As she sat in her office, staring out at the city skyline, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But justice never was, and Maya Jefferson was ready for the fight. Fabricate something, it could complicate things, she said, her voice steady but laced with concern. Marcus leaned in, his expression darkening. That's why we have to move fast. I'll talk to someone in Internal Affairs, but you should document everything immediately. The more evidence you have, the harder it'll be for them to twist the narrative. Maya nodded, taking a deep breath. She had spent her career fighting for justice, but now she was at the center of a battle she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just an attorney representing others. She was now her own client in a fight against a broken system. As they finished their lunch, Maya felt a sense of renewed resolve. She wouldn't let fear dictate her next steps. Instead, she would use the law, the very system these officers thought they could manipulate, to hold them accountable. Later that evening, Maya sat at her desk, meticulously detailing every part of her encounter. She listed the officers' names, badge numbers, their words and actions. She included timestamps, descriptions of witnesses, and even noted the raised phone cameras capturing the incident. Every detail mattered. Her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Talk to my contact. We need to move carefully, but this could lead to something bigger. Be ready. Maya stared at the screen, her grip tightening on her pen. She knew what that meant. This wasn't just about two rogue cops. This was about systemic abuse, a pattern of misconduct that had been allowed to continue unchecked. She wasn't naive. Retaliation was a possibility. Officers like Miller and Rohr thrived on intimidation, and they wouldn't take kindly to a formal complaint, especially from someone like her. But she wasn't backing down. Before going to bed, she placed her notes and evidence in a locked file. Tomorrow she would take the first step toward exposing the truth. As she turned off the light, she reminded herself of something her father had once told her. Real justice isn't given, Maya. It's taken. And sometimes you have to be the one to take it. She closed her eyes, knowing that by sunrise, her fight for accountability would truly begin. Expected to turn herself in at the precinct first thing in the morning. Her grip tightened around the phone as her pulse pounded in her ears. This was retaliation, a blatant attempt to silence her. Maya forced herself to stay calm. "Thank you for informing me," she said evenly, before ending the call. She immediately dialed Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you're joking," he said after she relayed the news. "I wish I was." Marcus let out a sharp breath. "All right, this changes things. They're trying to put you on the defensive, make you the criminal instead of the victim." Maya's jaw clenched. "I won't let them." Marcus was already working through the legal options. "First, don't go in alone. I'll meet you at the precinct with a defense attorney. Second, we'll make sure the Civil Rights Division is aware. Third, Maya, this could get ugly. They want to scare you off." "Well, they picked the wrong woman to intimidate," she shot back. Maya barely slept that night. By morning, she dressed in a sharp black suit. If she was going down to the precinct, she would do so looking every bit the attorney she was. As she and Marcus arrived, she noticed the way officers watched her with unreadable expressions. Inside, a booking officer processed her paperwork with routine indifference, but she could feel the tension in the air. Then the real battle began. Detective Costell from Internal Affairs arrived, looking irritated. "Miss Jefferson, I had no idea they were filing charges against you when I called yesterday." "That makes two of us," she replied dryly. Marcus leaned in. "Detective, you and I both know these charges are retaliatory." Costell's jaw twitched, but he didn't argue. "That's why I want to hear her side of things. Let's talk." Seated in a windowless conference room, Maya laid everything out. The unlawful stop, the illegal search, the physical intimidation, and the thinly veiled threats. Then she produced the video evidence she had collected, clips of the officers mishandling her, bystanders reacting in shock, the audio of Rohr smirking about writing her up. By the time she finished, Costell's expression had darkened. "I'm not saying the NYPD will throw them under the bus, but this doesn't look good." "Good," Maya said, steel in her voice, "because I want my name cleared, and I want an investigation." Hours later, she walked out of the precinct, charges dropped before they even had a chance to stick. That night, local news stations picked up the story. Black attorney falsely charged after exposing corrupt officers. And just like that, the fight wasn't just hers anymore. It was a movement. "Resist, I didn't flee, and I certainly didn't threaten them. This is an attempt to silence me." Costello exhaled sharply, clearly irritated by what he was seeing. He inserted the USB into a laptop and played the video. The footage was damning. It showed Maya standing calmly as the officers searched her vehicle, Rohr shoving her without cause, and Miller smirking as he spoke to her. There was no aggression on Maya's part, no resistance, no threats. After a long pause, Costello shut the laptop. "This is bad," he admitted. "If what I'm seeing here is accurate, these officers lied in their report." Maya folded her arms. "And what happens now?" The detective leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "If I move forward with this, it won't just be about your case. This could blow up into something much bigger." Maya didn't blink. "Good, it needs to." Costello nodded slowly. "All right, I'm going to make some calls." He stood up and left the room, leaving Maya alone with the weight of what was happening. Minutes ticked by. She knew what was at stake. If Costello's investigation moved forward, it could expose not only Miller and Rohr, but potentially a larger pattern of misconduct. Finally, Costello returned, his expression tense but determined. "I spoke to the precinct captain. For now, we're putting a hold on your arrest warrant while we review the evidence. I'll be forwarding this to Internal Affairs." Relief flooded Maya's chest, but she remained guarded. "That's a start." Costello rubbed his temples. "Miss Jefferson, if you pursue this, you need to be prepared. The police union is powerful, and these officers are going to push back." Maya met his gaze steadily. "I've spent my entire career fighting for justice. I'm not backing down now." A muscle in Costello's jaw tightened, but then he extended a hand. "Then I'll do my job. I'll be in touch." Maya shook his hand firmly, knowing this was just the beginning. As she left the precinct, she pulled out her phone and dialed Marcus. "How'd it go?" he asked immediately. "The warrant is on hold and Internal Affairs is getting involved," she said, voice steady. "This is bigger than just me, Marcus. This is about every person these officers have mistreated." On the other end of the line, Marcus exhaled. "All right, Maya, let's make sure they never get away with this again." And just like that, the battle for justice truly began. Maya worked tirelessly to prepare. She compiled every piece of evidence, the video clip, the witness statements she managed to collect, and a formal affidavit detailing the encounter in exact legal terms. She wasn't just going to defend herself, she was going to expose the corruption behind it. The morning of the hearing, she arrived at the courthouse dressed in a charcoal gray suit, exuding confidence despite the weight of what was ahead. Marcus met her outside, holding a folder of additional legal documents. "You ready?" he asked, scanning her face for any hesitation. Maya nodded. "More than ready." Inside the courtroom, she took her seat at the defense table while across from her, Officers Miller and Rohr sat smugly, their lawyer whispering instructions. The judge presiding over the case, Judge Raymond Coughlin, was known for his pro-police stance. Maya had expected resistance, but she had come prepared. The prosecution began by reiterating the officers' claims that Maya had resisted arrest, been uncooperative, and had verbally threatened them. They confidently submitted their fabricated police report as evidence. Then it was Maya's turn. She rose calmly and approached the bench. "Your Honor," she said, her voice firm but professional. "Before proceeding, I'd like to disclose something that was not included in the arrest report." Judge Coughlin raised a skeptical brow. "Go on." Maya reached into her folder and pulled out her credentials, holding them up for the court. "My name is Maya Jefferson. I am an assistant United States attorney." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. The smirks on Miller and Rohr's faces evaporated. The judge leaned forward, suddenly alert. Maya continued, pacing slightly. "I have spent years prosecuting cases under the very laws these officers claim to uphold, and I know when those laws are being abused." She gestured to the police report. "This document is a work of fiction, but I don't expect you to take my word for it." She turned to Marcus, who handed her a USB drive. "Your Honor, I am submitting video evidence that directly contradicts the officer's claims." The bailiff took the USB to the court clerk, who loaded the footage onto a monitor. As the video played, the courtroom watched in stunned silence as the truth unfolded. Maya standing calmly, complying with instructions, and then being shoved against her car. Judge Coughlin's face darkened. He turned to the prosecution. "Do you have an explanation for this?" The prosecutor stammered. "Your Honor, we were not aware of this footage." Maya didn't wait. "Your Honor, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against me. Furthermore, I formally request that Officers Miller and Rohr be investigated for filing a false police report, abuse of power, and civil rights violations." The judge exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "This court has no choice but to dismiss all charges immediately," he said. Then turning to the prosecution, he added, "And I expect a full internal review on this matter." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Maya stole a glance at Miller and Rohr. Their faces were pale, their bravado shattered. As Maya walked out of the courthouse, the weight she had carried for the past week finally lifted. She knew this fight wasn't over. Exposing corruption was just the first step. But as she and Marcus stepped into the bright daylight, she allowed herself a small, victorious smile. The system had tried to silence her, but in the end, justice had spoken louder. Judge Harrison lifted an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Video evidence?" he echoed. Stella nodded and handed a USB drive to the court clerk. "Yes, Your Honor. The footage, recorded by a bystander, shows my client remaining calm and compliant throughout the stop. It also captures Officers Miller and Rohr escalating the encounter without cause. The courtroom remained silent as the footage played. On screen, Maya could be seen standing beside her vehicle, hands visible, speaking in a measured tone. Then came the moment when Officer Rohr pushed her against the car, and Officer Miller rummaged through her back seat without consent. Maya could feel the shift in the room, spectators whispering, a flicker of hesitation crossing Judge Harrison's stern expression, and, most satisfying of all, the barely concealed panic in the eyes of Officers Miller and Rohr. Stella took the opportunity to press forward. Your Honor, this video not only disproves the officers' claims, but it raises serious concerns about their conduct. Furthermore, she paused for effect, my client is not just any defendant. She is Maya Jefferson, an assistant United States attorney. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Caroline Whitaker's confident demeanor faltered. Judge Harrison's expression hardened, but he could no longer mask his unease. Maya stepped forward, her voice steady. Your Honor, I have prosecuted cases for years, and I know the weight of a false police report. What these officers did wasn't just an abuse of authority. It was an attempt to undermine justice itself. If this can happen to me, imagine how many others they've done this to without consequence. Judge Harrison exhaled slowly and glanced toward the prosecution table. Miss Whitaker, given this new evidence, does the state still wish to proceed with these charges? Caroline hesitated. She knew she was cornered. Finally, with a forced neutrality, she replied, the state moves to dismiss all charges, Your Honor. Judge Harrison nodded once, then turned to the officers. His tone was cold. Officers Miller and Rohr, given the troubling nature of this video evidence, I will be referring this matter to Internal Affairs for further review. Dismissed. With a sharp bang of the gavel, the case was over. Maya exhaled, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. But it wasn't just relief, it was victory. As she and Stella exited the courtroom, reporters swarmed, eager for a statement. Maya paused, lifting her chin. This isn't just about me. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that no one, not even law enforcement, is above the law. As the cameras flashed and the crowd murmured, Maya knew this moment was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, but today justice had prevailed. Miss Taylor not only cooperated fully, but was subjected to an unlawful search and humiliating treatment. Judge Robert Callahan peered over his reading glasses. Video evidence? Is it from a body cam? It's from a bystander, Taylor's attorney, Vanessa Clark, replied. Recorded on a cell phone and posted online. We also have the original file. Caroline Monroe, the district attorney, interjected. Your Honor, I'd caution against relying on shaky cell phone footage. There's no guarantee of authenticity. My officers have clean records, and the official police report states that the defendant resisted. We have no reason to doubt their testimony. Judge Callahan frowned slightly. I'll allow the video, but it must be verified before we consider it as evidence. For now, we'll proceed with the arraignment. Miss Taylor, how do you plead? Vanessa spoke before Taylor could. Not guilty, Your Honor. Judge Callahan made a note. Very well. Let's schedule a preliminary hearing to review the evidence. He glanced up at Taylor for the first time, his gaze lingering. Taylor felt an unsettling chill, as if he was assessing more than just her legal standing. Bail is set at $55,000, he ruled, his tone dismissive. Next matter. Taylor's cheeks burned with indignation at the excessive bail for such a minor charge, but Vanessa had anticipated this. She posted bail immediately, ensuring Taylor wouldn't spend a second longer in custody. As Taylor turned to leave, her eyes locked onto Officer Scott Mercer, one of the arresting officers. He smirked, mouthing something she couldn't quite make out. But the contempt in his expression was unmistakable. She forced herself to look away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Out in the hallway, Vanessa led her to a bench. This is going to be an uphill battle, she sighed. Judge Callahan has a long history of siding with law enforcement, and that DA, Monroe, she'll fight tooth and nail to protect these officers. Taylor stared at the drab courthouse walls, her mind racing. I'm not backing down, she said firmly. I need to speak with the Civil Rights Division. This could become a federal matter. Vanessa nodded. I agree. The moment you reveal your position as an attorney for the DOJ, everything changes. But are you sure you want to tip your hand this early? Taylor hesitated, considering. Not yet, she said finally. I need more. More evidence. More insight into these officers' records. And if Callahan tries to railroad this case, we'll push for it to be moved to federal court. Vanessa agreed, and they parted ways after setting up a strategy meeting. As Taylor walked out of the courthouse, an uneasy mix of anger and steely resolve churned inside her. The slights, the humiliating pat-down, the fabricated charges, none of it would deter her. She pulled out her phone and dialed Marcus, outlining the next steps. She also planned to contact an investigator in the Civil Rights Division, laying the groundwork for a potential federal case against these officers. Stepping onto the bustling street, Taylor felt the wind on her face, a reminder of her freedom and her will. She thought about the countless others who weren't equipped to fight back, who had been swallowed by a system designed to silence them. A silent promise echoed in her mind. She would not be broken. She would fight this injustice, and she would win. Submission. The key is timing. If we play this right, we can expose not just these officers, but the system that enables them. Jennifer folded her arms deep in thought. What's your next move? Maya tapped the files Samira had given her. I need to solidify the case. If I can find more victims willing to speak out, we'll have a stronger argument that this is a pattern of abuse, not just an isolated incident. Jennifer hesitated, then said, Be careful. The moment they realize who you are, they might retaliate in ways you don't expect. Maya knew the risks, but she had already made her choice. That evening, she contacted Marcus, who connected her with a local journalist named David Lawson. He had covered police misconduct cases before and was known for exposing corruption within law enforcement. Over the phone, David sounded intrigued. If you can get a few victims on record, I can push this into the public eye. But are you sure you want to go public? Not yet, Maya said. I need to see how the court handles my case first, but I want to be ready in case they try to silence me. David agreed to start gathering background information, while Maya worked on finding more victims willing to share their stories. The next morning, Maya and Stella returned to court for the preliminary hearing. As expected, Judge Callahan remained cold and indifferent. Caroline Monroe, the DA, continued defending the officers with unwavering confidence. The officers acted within protocol, Monroe argued. The defendants' refusal to comply with their instructions justified their response. Stella stood, her voice steady and firm. Your Honor, we have compiled multiple complaints against these officers, along with a video that directly contradicts their account. If necessary, we're prepared to file a motion to have this case moved to federal court on civil rights grounds. Judge Callahan's expression darkened. Ms. Clark, this is a simple arraignment, not a civil trial. Stella smirked. For now, Maya remained silent, watching as the judge struggled to maintain control. She knew her moment was coming. Then, as the DA pushed for a plea deal, Maya rose to her feet. Your Honor, before any further discussion, I believe this court has a right to know exactly who I am. Judge Callahan narrowed his eyes. And who might that be? Maya reached into her bag, pulling out her Department of Justice credentials and placing them firmly on the desk. Maya Taylor, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Monroe paled. The officers stiffened, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Judge Callahan sat back, adjusting his glasses, clearly thrown off balance. Maya's voice remained steady. And as an officer of the court, I know exactly what a false report looks like. The tension in the room was suffocating. Monroe cleared her throat. Your Honor, if I may. Judge Callahan held up a hand, silencing her. He turned to the officers. Miller, Roar, anything you wish to add? Neither spoke. Maya took a deep breath, then delivered the final blow. I have already begun discussions with the Civil Rights Division regarding this matter. If necessary, I will ensure this case is escalated beyond this courtroom. Callahan's face twitched. We'll reconvene after reviewing the new evidence. As Maya walked out of the courtroom, Stella whispered, Now they know exactly who they messed with. Maya smiled, the weight of injustice slowly lifting from her shoulders. The fight wasn't over, but the tide was turning. Grip tightened on the edge of the table as she prepared for the battle ahead. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents before him. Ms. Whitaker, the prosecution may proceed. Whitaker stood confidently. Your Honor, the state maintains that the defendant, Ms. Jefferson, resisted lawful commands from 2 officers during a routine traffic stop. She refused to exit her vehicle in a timely manner, obstructed the officers in their duties, and became verbally combative. Maya bit the inside of her cheek, forcing herself to remain composed. It was all lies, but she had expected nothing less. Whitaker continued, the officers acted within protocol, and the charges should proceed to trial. Judge Harrison nodded slightly before turning to Stella. Ms. Morano, your response? Stella stood, her presence commanding. Your Honor, the defense has video evidence, a sworn affidavit from an eyewitness, and documented records of prior misconduct complaints against these officers. Complaints that suggest a troubling pattern. She stepped forward, placing the files on the judge's bench. The footage will show that Ms. Jefferson complied with all orders. There was no aggression, no resistance, and no obstruction. The only misconduct here was committed by the officers. Judge Harrison frowned, glancing at the files, but he did not immediately reach for them. Instead, he turned to the prosecution. Ms. Whitaker, have you reviewed this evidence? Whitaker's lips pursed. We question the credibility of the video and the witness, Your Honor. The footage is incomplete, and bystander accounts can be subjective. Stella didn't hesitate. Subjective? The footage clearly shows Officer Rohr shoving my client while Officer Miller rummaged through her car without probable cause. And as for credibility, Kesha Brown's sworn statement aligns with the footage. Meanwhile, the officers' reports contradict the facts. Either they lied or they failed to properly recall the events, both of which are unacceptable from law enforcement. Maya kept her eyes on Judge Harrison, searching for any hint of how he might rule. His face was unreadable. After a tense pause, the judge sighed. I will allow the video to be presented. Whitaker's expression tightened, but she didn't protest. The court clerk played the footage on a monitor. The room fell silent as the grainy video displayed Officer Rohr shoving Maya against her car, while Officer Miller smirked, searching her vehicle. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder when Rohr's voice came through, sneering. You think you're above us? The air in the courtroom shifted. Judge Harrison leaned back, rubbing his temple. This complicates matters. He turned toward the prosecution. Ms. Whitaker, explain why this wasn't mentioned in the police report. Whitaker hesitated. Your Honor, the officers acted in good faith. The video is only a partial representation. Judge Harrison raised a hand, cutting her off. And yet, it tells a different story than the one presented in their reports. A charged silence settled over the room. Finally, Harrison exhaled. The evidence presented raises significant doubt about the credibility of the officer's testimony. I see no basis to proceed with these charges. He slammed his gavel. Case dismissed. A murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Maya let out a slow breath. She had won, but it wasn't over. As she gathered her things, she glanced at Miller and Rohr. Their smug expressions had vanished, replaced by something darker, humiliation, and maybe even fear. She stood tall, making sure they saw her unwavering resolve. This wasn't just a victory for her. It was a warning, arguing with officers and hesitating to exit the vehicle. She was confrontational from the start, Miller insisted, his expression cold and unyielding. Stella approached, her voice calm but cutting. Officer Miller, can you confirm that you issued a verbal warning before initiating the search? Miller's jaw tightened. I informed her that we had probable cause. Stella raised an eyebrow. And what exactly was the probable cause? Because according to your report, she was pulled over for speeding. What suspicion justified a physical search? Miller hesitated for half a second too long. She was behaving suspiciously. Suspicious how? She kept questioning our authority. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Stella let the silence hang. Questioning an officer isn't a crime, is it? Miller's lips thinned. Depends on the situation. So in this case, a woman calmly asking why she was pulled over was reason enough to conduct a physical search? Miller shifted in his seat. We followed protocol. Stella turned slightly, gesturing toward the video still frozen on the courtroom monitor. Is this what proper protocol looks like? A fully compliant individual being shoved against her car? Miller's gaze flicked toward Whitaker, searching for reassurance. Whitaker, however, remained expressionless. "No further questions," Stella said, returning to her seat. Next, Officer Rohr took the stand, his face set in a scowl. Whitaker wasted no time leading him through his testimony. "Officer Rohr, did you feel physically threatened at any point during your interaction with Ms. Jefferson?" "Yes," Rohr said immediately. "She was defiant, slow to obey commands, and her tone was aggressive." Stella stood. "Officer Rohr, are you familiar with body language cues?" Rohr frowned. "Of course. In your professional experience, does someone standing still with their hands visible, speaking in an even tone, signal aggression?" Rohr's mouth pressed into a thin line. "It's not just about body language, it's about attitude." "Ah," Stella nodded, pacing slightly. "So, a black woman questioning authority is an attitude problem, not a legal right?" Rohr's face darkened. "That's not what I meant." "It's what you implied," Stella shot back. "You claim she was threatening, but the video contradicts you. No raised voice, no sudden movements, just a woman complying. Would you like to explain the discrepancy?" Rohr exhaled sharply. "The video doesn't show everything." "No, it doesn't," Stella agreed, "but it does show you pushing my client without justification. And that's enough." Judge Harrison shifted uncomfortably, rubbing his temple. "Let's keep this focused. We'll proceed to closing arguments." Whitaker went first, doubling down on her claims. "Your Honor, while the video may cast some doubt, it does not disprove the officer's version of events. Police must make split-second decisions in unpredictable situations, and questioning them after the fact undermines their ability to protect the public." Stella stepped forward, her voice ringing with clarity. "Your Honor, this is not about undermining law enforcement. It is about ensuring that law enforcement is held accountable when they overstep. The video, the witness testimony, and the history of complaints against these officers all point to one truth. Maya Jefferson was wrongfully targeted and falsely accused." A heavy silence filled the room. Judge Harrison inhaled deeply, then exhaled. This court cannot ignore the contradictions in the officers' testimonies, nor the troubling implications raised by the defense's evidence. He lifted his gavel. "The charges against Ms. Jefferson are hereby dismissed." The words rang through the courtroom. Relief flooded Maya's chest, but she refused to let herself celebrate. Not yet. As she turned to leave, her gaze met Miller's. His face was blank, but his clenched fist betrayed his anger. This wasn't over. Not for her, not for anyone else they had harmed, and she would make sure of it. "Because I understand how these situations can escalate, especially for black individuals. But the truth is, these officers had no legal grounds to search my vehicle, no legitimate reason to detain me beyond issuing a citation, and absolutely no justification for fabricating charges against me." The courtroom remained eerily silent for a moment, the weight of Maya's revelation settling over everyone like a thick fog. Judge Harrison's stern expression faltered, his gaze flickering toward the prosecution table, where Whitaker sat stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Whitaker cleared her throat, clearly rattled. "Your Honor, Judge Harrison held up a hand. "I'll take a recess," he announced abruptly, standing from the bench before anyone could object. 15 minutes. As he exited, murmurs erupted among the spectators. Maya turned to Stella, who gave her a knowing look. "That," Stella whispered, "was the perfect time to drop that bombshell." Across the room, Miller and Rohr sat frozen, their smug demeanor from earlier entirely gone. Maya met Miller's gaze head-on, watching his face twitch with barely concealed frustration. He knew what her revelation meant. When court resumed, Judge Harrison's tone was noticeably subdued. He adjusted his glasses, glancing down at his notes before speaking. After reviewing the evidence presented, including the video footage and witness testimony, it is clear that the prosecution's claims are inconsistent with the facts. He let out a slow breath. The charges against Ms. Jefferson are dismissed. A collective exhale rippled through the gallery, followed by hushed murmurs of approval. Stella patted Maya's shoulder, her expression triumphant. Whitaker, looking visibly displeased, quickly gathered her files and turned to Miller and Rohr. Whatever she whispered to them was lost in the buzz of conversation, but their faces told the story. This was not how they had expected things to unfold. As Maya collected her belongings, she felt a rush of relief but knew the fight wasn't over. This wasn't just about her. This was about every person these officers had mistreated, every false charge they had manufactured, every moment of injustice they had hidden behind their badges. Before stepping out of the courtroom, Maya turned back to Miller and Rohr, offering them one final pointed look. "You picked the wrong person," she said softly, just loud enough for them to hear. Then with her head held high, she walked out, ready to take the next step in ensuring that justice wasn't just a fleeting victory, but a lasting change. Maya Jefferson sat across from Assistant Attorney General Vanessa Castillo, her heart steady despite the weight of their conversation. "I've reviewed the court transcripts," Castillo said, folding her hands. "You handled yourself well, but this situation puts the DOJ in a delicate position." Maya nodded. "I understand, ma'am, but this isn't just about me. Officers Miller and Rohr have a pattern of misconduct. I have complaints, affidavits, and video evidence. This is systemic." Castillo removed her glasses, studying her. "If we pursue this, we must be prepared for political backlash." Maya met her gaze. "Isn't it our job to uphold the law, no matter the cost?" A flicker of approval passed over Castillo's face. "The Civil Rights Division is reviewing the case. If we find enough evidence, a formal inquiry will begin." She leaned forward. "Are you ready for this fight?" Maya didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am." Within days, the fallout began. Detective Costello's investigation uncovered damning evidence: tampered reports, missing body cam footage, and witness statements contradicting official records. Several dismissed cases against Miller and Rohr were reopened. Meanwhile, Maya and Stella pushed forward. They filed motions to dismiss the charges, citing clear misconduct. Then a bombshell dropped. The New York Times ran an exposé titled "Patterns of Abuse: How Two NYPD Officers Evaded Accountability for Years." The article, backed by internal documents and witness accounts, ignited public outrage. Under pressure, Judge Harrison scheduled a final motion hearing. The courtroom was packed. Lawyers, activists, and journalists filled the seats. Harrison cleared his throat, his usual confidence strained. "Given the new evidence and concerns about the integrity of this case, the charges against Ms. Jefferson are hereby dismissed with prejudice." The room erupted into murmurs. Stella squeezed Maya's shoulder in triumph. Across the aisle, Miller and Rohr sat motionless, their arrogance replaced by shock. Maya wasn't done. She stood, adjusting her suit. "Your Honor, I request this court recommend an independent review of all past cases involving these officers." Harrison hesitated, then glanced at Whitaker, the prosecutor. She nodded stiffly, knowing resistance was futile. "I will submit the recommendation," Harrison stated, his voice tight. The aftermath was swift. Miller and Rohr were suspended, and the Civil Rights Division officially opened a probe into the NYPD's handling of misconduct complaints. Weeks later, both officers were indicted for falsifying reports and abuse of authority. Standing outside the courthouse as reporters shouted questions, Maya took a deep breath. This wasn't about headlines. It was about something deeper. Stella smirked beside her. "They finally picked on the wrong black woman." Maya chuckled. "And they won't be the last, but at least now they know we're watching." She walked away, knowing the fight wasn't over. But today, justice had struck exactly where it was needed, to document everything. One afternoon, as Maya was reviewing files in her office, she received a text from an unknown number. "Drop the case, or you'll regret it." She stared at the message, anger rising. This wasn't just intimidation. It was desperation. The pressure was building, and someone wanted her silenced. But they had picked the wrong person. The day of the hearing arrived. Maya, Stella, and Marcus entered the packed courtroom. Reporters lined the back rows and activists filled the seats. Judge Harrison, looking uncharacteristically tense, called the court to order. Before Whitaker could begin, Stella stood. "Your Honor, in light of the Department of Justice's ongoing investigation into the officers involved in this case, we move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." Whitaker's face hardened. "Your Honor, the investigation is not yet concluded, and Ms. Jefferson still—" Harrison held up a hand. "Counselor, is it true that the DOJ has launched a formal probe into officers Miller and Rohr?" Whitaker hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor." Harrison sighed, rubbing his temple. "Given this development, I see no reason to proceed. The charges against Ms. Jefferson are dismissed with prejudice. This case is closed." The room erupted into murmurs. Stella exhaled in relief, while Maya sat still, absorbing the moment. Outside the courthouse, a wave of reporters rushed toward them. "What's your reaction to the charges being dropped? Will you take legal action against the NYPD?" Maya took a deep breath. "I'm grateful justice prevailed today, but this isn't just about me. It's about accountability. We have to ask, how many others have been falsely charged or intimidated by the people meant to protect them? That's why I won't stop fighting." Later that evening, she sat in her apartment, watching the news. Footage of her courtroom statement played on the screen. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus, you made waves today," he said. "The DOJ isn't just investigating the precinct anymore. They're looking into citywide misconduct patterns." Maya closed her eyes, exhaustion creeping in. But beneath it was something stronger. Determination. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to smile. This was only the beginning. And the ongoing DOJ investigation. It was surreal to see her name tied to such a pivotal moment. She had started this fight as just another black woman wrongfully targeted by law enforcement. But now she was a symbol of something greater. Her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "You did it. You changed the game." Maya exhaled, exhaustion and relief intertwining. She had faced down the system and won, but she knew this was only one battle in a much larger war. There would always be another case, another injustice to fight, another abuse of power to expose. Still, for now, she allowed herself a moment of peace. She had fought back, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. And she had proven one undeniable truth. When armed with knowledge, courage, and the will to fight, justice was possible. Citizens. The crowd murmured in agreement, and Maya could see the impact of her words. This wasn't just about her case anymore. It was about the countless others who never got the chance to fight back. As she stepped away from the podium, Marcus walked up beside her. "You sure you don't want to run for office?" he teased. Maya chuckled, shaking her head. "Not yet. I have too much work to do here." She knew this was only the beginning. There would be more cases, more battles, and more obstacles. But she had proven that standing up to corruption wasn't just possible. It was necessary. And as long as there were people willing to fight, justice would never be out of reach. Story and choose to stand up, to speak out, and to demand accountability. As Maya closed her eyes, the city's distant hum served as a reminder that the fight for justice never truly ended. It only evolved. But now, because of her case, more people were paying attention, more voices were being raised, and more change was on the horizon. She had stepped into the fire, faced down corruption, and come out stronger. And if the system ever dared to silence the innocent again, she would be there, ready to fight. Lessons from Maya Jefferson's story: how to stand against injustice in real life. Maya Jefferson's story is more than just a courtroom battle. It's a reflection of real-life struggles faced by many people, particularly in marginalized communities, when dealing with law enforcement and systemic bias. Her resilience, knowledge, and strategic approach to fighting injustice offer valuable lessons for all of us. 1. Know your rights. One of the most powerful aspects of Maya's journey was her deep understanding of the law. She knew what the police could and could not do, which allowed her to challenge their misconduct without escalating the situation. In real life, knowing your rights, whether during a traffic stop, a workplace dispute, or any legal matter, can protect you from being taken advantage of. Educate yourself on basic legal protections, such as the right to remain silent, the right to refuse unlawful searches, the right to request a lawyer if detained. 2. Document everything. Maya kept meticulous records of her encounter, including video evidence, notes, and witness statements. This was crucial in disproving the false charges against her. In today's world, documentation is key. Record interactions when you feel your rights are being violated, if legally permitted. Keep copies of emails, texts, or official complaints related to workplace or social discrimination. Ask for witnesses to provide statements if an incident occurs. 3. Seek allies and legal support. Maya did not fight alone. She reached out to legal experts, civil rights organizations, and allies within the system who could help push for accountability. If you ever face an unjust situation, connect with legal aid groups or community organizations that specialize in discrimination or wrongful treatment. Build a support system of people who can advocate on your behalf. Don't hesitate to reach out to the media or social justice groups if the system tries to silence you. 4. Understand the power of exposure. Maya's case gained attention because she was willing to bring her story to light. In reality, institutions often act only when there is enough public pressure. If you're facing injustice, use social media strategically to bring awareness to the issue. Reach out to journalists or advocacy groups that can amplify your story. Attend community meetings or protests to push for reforms. 5. Stay resilient. Change takes time. While Maya won her case, she also recognized that systemic change is slow. The same is true in real life. Fighting injustice can be exhausting, and the system is often resistant to accountability. But small victories pave the way for bigger reforms. If you find yourself in a fight for justice, stay persistent and don't give up, even when progress seems slow. Celebrate small wins. They contribute to larger changes over time. Remember that standing up for what's right can inspire others to do the same. Final thought. Maya's story teaches us that courage, strategy, and persistence can turn an unfair situation into a catalyst for reform. While not everyone has the resources of a U.S. attorney, everyone can take steps to protect themselves, seek justice, and demand change. Your voice matters. Your rights matter. And when faced with injustice, standing up, even in small ways, can create ripples that lead to lasting impact. Maya Jefferson's story is a powerful reminder that justice only comes when we dare to stand up and demand it. Do you think abuses like this need to be exposed? Leave your comments below. Like if you believe the truth needs to be revealed. Share to spread this story to more people. Comment your thoughts on this case. We want to hear from you. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. Every share, every comment has the power to change perceptions. Let's speak up and make a difference.